Oh, there we go.
Hello, Chris and Don.
Hello.
Welcome, KT.
Hey, Scott.
Hey, we'll get things rolling here in a
Crescent.
little bit.
I'm a little early. My husband and I were watching a show on Netflix. It was like a Sam Spade in France. And I realized when it
Oh,
switched
I
over
see.
that I had better leave or I was going to be late.
Well, gosh, I'm flattered that you would.
Caught up in the drama of something I can see later. This is more important.
Oh, gosh. Yeah, super flattered. But also glad that you could come in. Yeah, thanks for choosing VR. And welcome, Bonnie. Yeah, actually, was just thinking about you. I fired up another game of Baldur's Gate 3 last night.
Oh yeah, I
Super fun.
started mine with Dawn on Saturday. So yeah.
Yeah, it's such a fun game. I feel like it's been enough of a break now that it's kind of fresh again.
Mm.
Which difficulty level are you playing?
I'm actually, this is how boring I am. I'm like almost the same exact character. I just like being a monk.
I'm doing a Drake this time.
Ah. Out of curiosity, are you in on the Mac?
I'm on my iPad,
Neat. I'm so glad it
Wow.
works.
mostly.
Mostly. That's a good footnote. A little asterisk.
I can see your avatar. I can't see Katie Phoenix or Kristen Down. So yes, there are limitations for sure.
Oh no.
I popped out to look, trying to get the name of a game I played a while back. And why am I not seeing it here?
Oh, do you
It
have a
was a
favorite genre?
it was a Rift 2. I didn't play desktop games that much because of being too busy at work. But one of the first ones that I played in, I think on my Rift 2, was one about an android in space. and it had the physics for zero gravity. Just was wonderful. You had inertia, but no weight. And I remember it is on my desktop. Come to think, native to the Quest itself. You play an android that gets woken up after having had some sort of damage, and you're the only one in the ship with a human, and you're trying to figure out, what's going on, why there's been a catastrophe, and you're trying to save the human.
Sounds fun.
Yeah, sounds like a good one.
The first few parts to the game you play are basically to help you get used to the physics. When you twist something, your whole body twists around because you're in zero G. They really do a good job of mimicking that. So you learn different things about that. How you can't stop immediately. You don't have immediate brakes. You have to slow down first. So at any rate, it was a lot of fun. There was a little time travel in it.
Ooh, time travel.
It was
that adds a twist.
It was really well. Just like I liked Stormlands for the ability of the character to climb mountains, and the climbing physics was really, really good in that one.
Yeah, it sounds like it had a nice polish, like good gameplay in addition to some story. Let's. I'll go ahead and get us kicked off here. I think everybody's come that's coming, and I love our group here today. And anybody that might pick up the stream as well or watching later, welcome. And we have the chat boxes up in world on our stream, so if anybody chats in, just like Ruth, let us know. Hey, you can't make it today because she's just not feeling all that great. So wishing her luck combating that virus that probably happened during the conference. That's always the curse of going to conferences, is coming back with whatever cold or flu somebody brought to share. So gosh, hey, if you're watching later on, hope you're starting to feel better. So let's dive into chapter 15. Maybe Hey is watching the stream. Lots of breathing bodies. Yes, yeah. Also in confined spaces, like these little conference rooms and breakout sessions. I hope you can stay with us and on the stream. But also please take care of that present self. Chicken noodle soup, hydration, those kinds of things. And we'll dive in here to chapter 15 with the EMDR. And also, throwing a thank you out, especially to Heyu on the stream there. It's always nice to see some chat activity. And of course, masks are so, 2020, right? Like the pandemic is over. I actually still do a mask if I go to like a grocery store and stuff. And I found I used to get like a bronchitis or really bad flu like every winter. And it's funny, ever since the pandemic and masking kind of became a little bit more of a norm, I find I don't usually catch that like yearly cold that I used to get anymore, which is nice because it would take you out for like a week or two. It's a little bit of a bummer that mask culture kind of faded a little bit, but I'm also glad I can wear a mask and like not get like side eye like I used to in back in the day. That's right. Yep, I'm keeping the tradition. And as always, would like to kind of start out with some norms as well. Is we kind of talk about some deeply personal and psychological topics in here. So we like to keep the space safe for discussion and sharing. We're just kind of a peer-to-peer mental wellness enthusiast group. And there's no professionals here. No one's here in any kind of a professional capacity. So we have no authority to diagnose or, no training for crisis management. Although if something, were to come up, we would definitely want to help, find the path to that assistance. So we do want to hear if there's struggles, so that we can be good friends and guide towards the kind of help that can help in a crisis. Please, no fixing or advising. We like to give space and pauses for shares and emotion. It can be difficult to share, and it can also kind of put us back in our shell if suddenly we're like bombarded with with advice and anecdotes about what that brought up, and so I also catch myself. I'm here advocating it as a norm, but it's just instinct, right? We see somebody in pain or in discomfort, and we want to assist, but sometimes it's good to just let it breathe and let this be a space where you can just express the discomfort, because sometimes just the act of expression is healing in and of itself. If you do want feedback for a scenario, by all means, like add that onto the share that you'd like, or are open to feedbacks. And INU statement hygiene, that's always a plus for really any kind of, I think, productive discussion is, leaving the space to feel like you can contribute without being judged, or, it's not sparking a debate, just confirming we think we heard or we understood what was shared, instead of jumping into like the counterpoint. And confidentiality as well. Like, we're not here to collect stories or information to share in any capacity, but we do stream, of course, because we want to let the footprint for this event, be as wide as possible. If it can reach people that are interested in it, people that can't be here or want to watch on a different device. So, thank you for participating in a streaming event. We have the raise hand functionality for organized and safe sharing. If you click the squirrel, that gives a hand raise, and then I know that you have a comment and it's in the queue, and we'll pass the mic around. And there's also, just like Heyu is with us today in the chat, we have the Discord to keep in touch. So, it's the modern age where we have all kinds of ways to connect with one another. And welcome, Nolan, too. Thank you for jumping in. I'm happy to see you. So the chapter starts out with an anecdote about one of Dr. Vanderkolk's patients, who he names as David in the book. And David was a lifeguard working on lifeguard duty, and happened to see a group of teenagers misbehaving, just kind of causing a scene in the pool. And it was his duty to intervene. And unfortunately, the situation escalated, and he actually got hit with a broken bottle, and not only injured but maimed. It actually took his eyesight, for life. And having had a few of these kinds of injuries playing sports, or just doing something kind of silly. to get a thrill, and then ultimately ending up with a limp for the rest of your life, or missing a finger. Like these are super traumatic experiences, because like it's such a nothing moment, but you walk away with like a lifetime of consequence. So understandably, David, for decades of his life, like was constantly fixated on the situation, not only in the memory of it, but probably telling himself the would have, could have, should have, like imagining himself blocking the beer bottle, having dreams about, different ways the scenario could go down. And, this developed into kind of a rage, a hatred that he had no target for. And when that happens, a lot of times the people that you're surrounded by can become kind of the lightning rod for that unreconciled, suffering and disappointment. And he could no longer like feel love for family members. He was constantly criticizing his children, and just a complete inability to like relate in a positive way, just really stuck in the experience. Dr. Vanderkolk recommended EMDR as a treatment, part of the treatment plan for David to kind of get out of this PTSD stuckness. We talk a lot about how it's important to sort of reincorporate the memory in more of a normal way, where traumatic memory sort of exists outside of our normal memory process, and it cannot have a narrative. It cannot feel like it happened before. It feels like it's happening right now, over and over and over again. And what EMDR is, it kind of is like this process where you're prompted by the professional counselor or psychologist to bring these really painful, uncomfortable experiences kind of back to the forefront of your mind. And while you're in the present moment of that traumatic memory, they walk you through a series of these eye exercises that sort of make your eyes kind of go back and forth and shift. And the interesting part about this experience is it takes the body into a different state with the memory, so that it no longer feels like this repetitive, triggered, traumatic memory. It sort of scoots back in line with the linear narrative of your life, and you have this feeling, this realization that it's now like something that happened in the past, and it's not coming back in this repetitive cycle. So it's like you're kind of no longer, or this was David's feedback after his EMDR experience, was that he no longer felt that stuckness. And he had this focus on revenge and protecting himself from ever getting hurt again. And that feeling of this need for like vengeance that his sight was taken away shifted into the grieving and reflection, of the loss, and processing that, it's something that happened, and, able to kind of adopt the reality of it and sort of move forward. Reconnecting with family, like this is the most heartwarming part of the chapter, I think, is, you can imagine an angry parent and, radiating that energy out to the family on a consistent basis, and to shift that into, being a present and loving father, like how much that must have meant to the family. And starting to garden, this kind of side hobby passion, making the space to garden, and experiencing laughter, I think that's another heartwarming part of the story, was to find the room to really have that sense of humor again. So a real turnaround and success story for EMDR in David's case. So Dr. Vanderkolk, he has this really deep curiosity about EMDR because he spent so much of his career like studying trauma and kind of focusing on the talk therapy and other aspects of healing, like taking care of animals or performance, yoga. And here comes this unexpected field that is this rapid eye movement guidance, and it was such a mystery to him on why it worked, and he dove in and decided to try it himself. And he became convinced that there's something to it, and these are the reasons that he thinks EMDR is actually a very valid and interesting technique for healing from a traumatic memory. The first observation is that it's not necessary to talk about the experience. And this can be a source of discomfort for a lot of people to go into a talk therapy appointment and sort of have to explain and relive like all of these uncomfortable experiences. And it in a lot of ways that can feel validating to name things and to put it through our, verbal parts of our brain, maybe sometimes for the first time. So there's, not discounting that. But what's interesting about EMDR is it's not necessary. Like, you're being prompted to conjure the memories inside your mind. You're not sharing it. You're just bringing it to the surface while the practitioner like works through the steps. And since you are conjuring in this imagery, it sort of helps paint this narrative of, giving the patient like a shortcut, so to speak, of stitching the memories back together finally, because the practitioner will work you through like, bring this really discomfort, uncomfortable memory that keeps coming back to you, like bring that into your mind and focus on that. And, there's a couple of prompt questions that just kind of come from where you're at with that memory, like in a general sense. And the practitioner will prompt you, like, where does that go next? And a lot of times your mind sort of jumps through the sequence of stories that it normally goes through. And because the EMDR technique, like, puts them like physically in the past, maybe for the first time, it's like your mind gets the ability to sort of stitch them together and create the narrative that's been missing for so long. And Dr. Vanderkolk also has this anecdote in the book about somebody that came and saw him and ultimately said that he was such an unpleasant doctor that he would never even recommend anybody come to see him. So he just absolutely like despised Dr. Vanderkolk, but professed that the EMDR session actually worked for their traumatic memory. So this was a really interesting observation that you don't even have to like the practitioner, and the process still works, which is can be problematic in a talk therapy scenario, because you really need like a trusting relationship to have the conversations. And I thought this was a really important part of the EMDR experience too, is that talk therapy tends to flip you between what we call the autobiographical self and the present self. If we remember in a previous chapter, Dr. Vanderkolk talked about there's two parts of the brain, one that kind of is a timekeeper of all of your experiences and what you're planning for in the future. And then there's like a present self, which recognizes, I think, therefore I am, and, experiences the moment and has a sense of I, as an individual. And in talk therapy, to describe, your feelings and your memories, you're sort of flipping into your autobiographical self. and then the practitioner is moving you into the present self feeling of that, because present self is the one that has the key to changing, like how you feel about a memory or an experience. So the act of switching between those two states is of course unique to the talk therapy session, whereas EMDR, you're fully present like the whole time. Like that's your present self from start to finish, and you're not kind of moving back and forth between different parts of your brain that operate for different reasons. So that was a really big discovery on Dr. van der Kolk's part, is this concept of being 100% present and not having to kind of leave that state through the therapeutic session. And they were able to fund a study where they got roughly like 90 or so participants, 30 of which had a placebo, and showed a 42% improvement. And this is common for medical studies, especially psychology, to have an improvement. Sort of just making the commitment to participate in something is actually like a healing step. The community and the newness and the commitment, to self, like is all like part of the improvement. And then 28 participants were put on Prozac, which is an antidepressant that has a history of being very effective. But this was another part of medical studies that Dr. van der Kolk also noticed, is that Prozac tends to only give like this 5 to 15% bump on top of the placebo. So although Prozac, is effective, it tends to only be like a 5 or 15% bump during these kinds of studies. And of the 30 participants for EMDR, 1 in 4 tested as being completely cured from their PTSD memories and the difficulties associated to that. So after 8 sessions, 25% of the people reported, like, I'm good, like I'm ready to move past this. Whereas it was 1 in 10 on the Prozac side. And also the longevity of the experience. 8 months later, 60% of those EMDR recipients still scored as completely cured. It was able to successfully move them past this kind of switching back and forth and this biological wiring of being hyper vigilant and getting triggered into fight or flight. No more of that. They actually moved past it. And one of the really important aspects out of this study too, which I think maybe Dr. van der Kolk is one of the few that may have noticed, is people who have what would be considered the developmental, like childhood traumas, that complex PTSD that came from like sustained lack of a caregiver and feeling safe, versus these acute adults experiences like being robbed or being in a horrible accident, watching somebody get injured, like those kinds of PTSD. 50% of the adult acute trauma experiences were cured, but only 10% of the childhood developmental traumatic experiencers. So although EMDR has a high rate of success, the childhood development traumas that Dr. van der Kolk is trying to get pushed into the psychological diagnosis manuals so that we can start having studies on treatments for it. It's kind of resistant to EMDR. And I suspect because it's layered, EMDR seems to have an approach where it's like bring a experience to your mind and maybe experiences that are connected. But if you have like a whole lifetime these memories that are interconnected with multiple triggers, I think that's where it becomes a little bit resistant to the process. But resistant doesn't mean ineffective. That's still 10%, 1 in 10. Still certainly worth trying, especially if you've gone down a path where just nothing else seems to work. EMDR does have for showing up. I think this can work across a wide range of just self care and dedication. Like the switching from being a victim of PTSD to sort of taking back like the self-empowerment and discernment and beginning to challenge that inner voice of undeserving or no matter how you're able to kind of walk towards that commitment, that can be a huge step in the path. 42% improvement for people just showing up to take a study. You can factor that across just signing up for a support group or coming into VR like what we're doing right now, or talking in a mental health chat, calling the mental health helpline. These are all kind of placebo effect worthy activities that not only have their own aspects of healing, but just making the commitment and breaking out of patterns shows like a huge benefit. And I still kind of really thrilled in the newness of like discovering that I can try to move my awareness into my toe when I get into a triggered state, because my toe's not connected to my vagus nerve. So if I focus on like what's going on with my toe, I'm not sort of in an area of my body that's got feedback to my brain. So suddenly it's like I stepped off the rails and, the trigger is kind of going on over here. And I can look at it now objectively because I've sort of stepped to the side, and it gave me a chance to snap out of it. And I'll take any new technique to move out of a triggered state, or to lessen them or to completely stop it in that case. So what are we talking about, triggered and getting stuck? And I kind of have a metaphor for it, which may require a trip back to the 90s, which I know we're starting to get into generations that weren't here in the 90s, so we might have to explain a little bit. But back in the early 90s when computers had like 40 megabyte hard drives, and like 500K of RAM, and the internet was just like a fledgling kind of thing. Sometimes you would get these emails and it'd be like, click this link to find your fortune or something, and a lot of people would click it because there wasn't an awareness in that day of like what that meant, they kind of worked this way. I don't think you really see this type of activity on a computer anymore. I think like the operating systems figured out how to lock it down, but back in the early 90s there was no defense for it. It would just start popping up window after window after window until eventually like your whole monitor was filled with these little like advertisements and whatnot. And what it would do is it would consume the computer's resources so much because it only had like a megabyte or two, like 4 megabytes of RAM. It would fill that, and then it would start using the virtual memory on the hard disk too. So you'd hear the hard disk working, and these things would just keep popping up, albeit slower and slower. And you think to yourself, well, just open the task manager, right, and start like putting all of these programs to sleep. Well, what would happen is the program consumed all of the memory to the point that you couldn't open the task manager. You'd press the keyboard, indefinitely trying to get it to interrupt this process. And then even a keyboard interrupt would get put on the stack, so far above what's happening that, you might wait like 10, 15 minutes before the task manager would even finally open. And, a lot of times you just had to hard power off, pull the plug in your computer and reboot it because it was a lost cause at that point. But I think it's such a good metaphor for like what trauma does to the brain, and especially this complex developmental childhood trauma that we're talking about, like not just a single experience, but like a lifetime of difficult things like abandonment or abuse, is they sort of fill your brain to the capacity. And I can describe it as, the moments when you're kind of alone with your mind, if you're just in the shower or you're going to bed and you're trying to fall asleep, you don't have really any kind of external stimulus. So your mind's like, oh, okay, so this is probably a good time to think about that time you dropped your lunch tray in the cafeteria, back when you were in ninth grade. And as hard as that memory is, you sort of work through it and you finally, whatever coping mechanism you use to sort of put that memory back to put it back on its shelf, suddenly it's like, oh, you remember that time that jellyfish stung you and, the lifeguard like dragged you down the beach in front of everybody and it was super humiliating. It's like your brain just thrashes through these memories, these very triggering memories one at a time. And even if you're successful at putting it aside, it's like the next one is just like right there. So you have this never ending like leapfrog of uncomfortable experiences that put your body into that state that we've talked about, the fight or flight. And, imagine what that does to our sleep, right? Like we're trying to fall asleep. And this is the process like happening in our mind, is this kind of like grief thrashing. And what I found is that these whatever trick you can find, and I shouldn't really reference it as a trick either, like a technique, whatever you find that kind of starts working. For me, it was like VR and mindfulness and talk therapy. It sort of creates this new space like in your brain. And I believe physically what happens is you actually create like a new neural pathway. I kind of call it like the ledge neurons, because what it was for me, like metaphorically, is it's like I got this tiny little space to stand on like the side of a cliff and sort of objectively watch this process going on in my mind. I could reach this like in a meditative state of like stepping outside of the current of this trauma and actually just observe it like bouncing around in my mind and in my body. And it only takes one thing to grow that little spot, and then you can like exercise it and it gets bigger and it gets bigger, until eventually you can sort of just stay in that state, not indefinitely, because memories come and go. But when you have this kind of thrashing, this hard disk thrashing metaphor, when you have that, kind of calmed down to some degree in your head, it's so much easier to step out of a trigger if your mind's not fully consumed with like one thing after another. So what I credit these techniques of like EMDR and mindfulness and yoga and performance therapy is they sort of give your brain this ledge to stand on, where when this raging storm is happening and you're swept up in it, you can just step outside of it. Even if it's like only this 4-inch little space on the side of a cliff, you could just step out of it for a second and observe it and start making choices. Like, do I really want to feel this way right now? Or you know what? Like, maybe I did do my best when that thing happened. And you can start having the internal conversations in that kind of aspect. So yeah, and out of curiosity too, like where did EMDR come from? And it sort of has this little like, must be a fad kind of anecdote, this new trendy latest thing, to kind of shell out your insurance deductible dollars towards. But yeah, here's kind of what happened, though, is Dr. Francine Shapiro was walking in the park and just noticed that while she was experiencing some negative emotion, she was observing the park in a way that, her eyes were kind of darting around to all this scenery and stuff. And she just noticed, like, wow, like looking around in this fashion is sort of making this thing that I was uncomfortable about, like, evaporate. And, she had, the resources and the wherewithal to kind of tidy and polish that thought up into a process that you could like practice, and formed a study. And the study, just like Dr. Vanderkolk's study, showed those same results. Is people really felt like these memories they've been trying to tackle for half their lifetime suddenly felt like they were just these things that happened in the past, and they were difficult, but it's not coming back and just completely crushing their ability to function. And there was this link too that I thought was really interesting, which was between EMDR and REM sleep. And it makes you wonder, if our body just has some kind of program that natural, like, rapid eye movement, triggers a biological process in us, which kind of puts memories like in their categories and defines time for us and things like that. Because remember, we talked about the limbic system and the amygdala like not really having a concept of linear time. So when it gets triggered into fight or flight by something that happened 40 years ago, it doesn't know it's 40 years ago. It's just like we got to defend ourselves. So if the process of EMDR can simulate that REM stage of sleep, which is so important to like how we process our memories, how we move information from our mind like into our proper like memory areas. Perhaps it's a little bit of like a biohack to get that process started where it got stuck by the nature of what PTSD is. And, Dr. Vanderkolk repeats this concept many times in the book, which is PTSD is like the inability to integrate the memory into our experience. It's like you're trying to jam like a square peg or a round peg into a square hole, or whichever way it doesn't work. I can't think right now. A star into a triangle hole or something. But yeah, the EMDR process, Dr. Vanderkolk found was like one technique that sort of moved that memory into like a reintegration process where the body and mind could like rethink and no longer be stuck in the triggers of the memory. So yeah, EMDR in a nutshell is like the nature of PTSD. It changes our physiology in a way that short circuits like our ability to deal with it, and over time, it changes us physically. Like hypertension, for example, high blood pressure is a form of like a physical symptom that can come from PTSD, because the constant need to go into fight or flight, just naturally raises our heart rates and our blood pressure. So that's an example of like the physical symptoms that come from PTSD. And because of the way that you get triggered, and it's like cyclical, and it never resolves. You never move the memory into that normal space. It just goes back and waits for the next trigger. It sort of never resolves itself. You just get stuck in a pattern. So EMDR, it seems to unlock the pathway for the brain to finally process this memory, this really difficult experience. And it just becomes, another memory, another thing that happened in the past. And it gets its full narrative, and it takes away the confusion. So many people that experience EMDR report the memory loses its intensity. Gosh, how many memories do you have where you feel just the edge of it coming, and it's like your whole body tenses up, your stomach like moves, physically like moves, contracts, your heart sort of braces for the emotion. And that sort of lessens by the reports of patients that have gone through EMDR. Feelings of closure, like how good does it feel to finally, feel that sense of closure, this really problematic thought that we just can't seem to stop dwelling on because we feel like it should have resolved in some other way. For that to finally feel like, okay, I'm ready, to just move on from that. And sudden realizations of things not being our fault, that's one of the insidious parts of PTSD, is the shame, the regret, not only of the thing that happened, but of things that you've kind of had to do to protect yourself, like some of the false positives. Did you ever tear into somebody, because, you just you were in a triggered state and they happened to be like in your vicinity, to forgive oneself for that, because that came from a place of need, of protection. Not having fault or shame or regret, again, kind of opens up more space in the mind. And when you have more space in the mind to dedicate to the process, it's like the snowball kind of starts rolling in the other direction, where you're finally gaining ground and gaining your thoughts and your awareness back. And it's not stuck in this trigger that is just a cycle. And welcome, Ronin Otaku. Thanks for joining us. If it sounds
Hi there.
interesting. Hello. Yeah, we're just talking about chapter 15 of the book, Body Keeps the Score, which is a psychology book about trauma and the healing process. So yeah, if that sounds interesting, we're
That's
actually
cool.
we're gonna jump into some open discussion soon too. So you're right on time. So the inspiration for today is EMDR is kind of thought of in the practice as a before and an after. So the purpose of EMDR is to help the body and the mind understand that trauma is in the past, and it's not coming back and feeling like it's happening. Like remember, Dr. Van der Kolk did these studies in the MRI machine, and as people were recounting their traumatic experience, the brain pattern was reacting as if it was happening in that moment. So that's what a traumatic memory is we're kind of unable biologically to determine. Logically, we know it was in the past, but biologically it happens again and again, and it never moves to the past. But EMDR seems to be this key that can help it move in that direction. And Sim, who couldn't be with us today for today's event, was kind enough to offer some prompts for some reflection on the book's topics. So as we move into open discussion here, the floor is open for anything that you'd like to share, but we also have these wonderful prompts. So if you'd like to take a question off the list, and you can also share multiple times. Don't feel like you get a one and done. So if you have something to share, then you want to take a prompt and come back on the board. Everything's great here. We got we got lots of time, and like my friend Tom Nichols says, nobody's coming to escort us out. So the event is done, when it's done. So with that, yeah, I'll take any hand raises for, anything that we might like to share, noticed about the chapter or the book, just to say hello. Those are all welcome for topics to share. And I also have the handy dandy camera to send over to you if that's okay. And yeah, KT, thanks for kicking us off here. I'll send the camera over to you so our streamers can also see who's around.
Oh, wow.
I want to point out that desensitization is part of the name. And so that's something that I noticed in going through this process myself, is that you're in a safe, supportive environment before you even begin to set up the targets and the story you're telling yourself or the statement that you mentioned in a slide ago. The therapist will give you a lot of resources for dealing with the stress and pulling you out. And in my opinion, that's been real valuable. Just that alone would be very, very useful. Something to do mentally when you're under stress, in a situation like that, your safe place, your big toe, if that's what it is, But in the process, you are going through with a supportive environment with a therapist who can pull you out if you get into hard disk thrashing or memory thrashing. So it's a safe spot to do it in, theoretically. But then you get exposed to what it is that's bothering you multiple times in that environment. And then using, I think what you were talking about a lot was the eyes going back and forth, but sense research has shown that lots of bilateral stimulation can work. So if the eyes aren't working, you can go with bilateral sounds, or you can hold some clappers that buzz on one side and then buzz on the other. Seems to be anything that goes bilaterally through the brain kind of breaks up that stuck pattern. The downside, I would say, is if you're working with someone who's not that experienced or good at it, you can re-traumatize yourself. When you get exposed to that without necessary resources, without that care of the therapist to pull you out when you get stuck, that's one of the dangers of going through something like this, is re-traumatizing and making it more real than it was before. Like I said, if you get somebody who's trained in it, is certified in it, and all that kind of stuff, that's not, I think that odds are you'll get a good person, and you work with them for a while before you actually start the EMDR stuff. You can kind of get a sense of if this person is able to support you and listens to you and all of that. So you can back out before you actually start the EMD. It's not like you go in for therapy, your first therapy appointment, you're going to be doing this right away. It is a pretty significant commitment of time, particularly if you're talking about the childhood developmental trauma issues. That it can work for that, but you've got to be set up for it, emotionally and with the therapy. And so I just wanted to share a little bit of that to start with, and I'll stop there.
I really appreciate that, and I'm so glad that you could be with us today too, and choosing to pause the Netflix for a moment so you could come in. Like I still feel so flattered to be a part of the evening. But I think you brought up like so many important aspects too, which is since you've had the experience, you can communicate like all these additional aspects. Like it doesn't even have to be like guidance for your eye movement. It can be, paddles or sounds that move, kind of help something happen between your two hemispheres. That can be the assistant for it. And also, thanks for emphasizing, because it was mentioned in the book too, that there's a lot of preparation in the EMDR process. So it's not like you go through a drive-through and they wave like a flashlight or something. Like you're working
Exactly.
with a professional that's explaining like how do you establish like the state that you want to be in for this to work, and how to connect everything during the process. Yeah, I couldn't have conveyed that properly without your help.
And I assume the therapist can evaluate whether or not you're a good candidate for it. I can imagine that some folks with psychotic features, this might not be the best therapy. And so they can identify that and guide you into something that would be more benefit to you if the EMDR would actually be more harmful than helpful.
Yeah, that's a good point too. It reminds me of this one time in college. There was this like hypnosis demonstration, and the hypnotist was going through the crowd, like kind of determining like if you were a candidate for hypnosis. And they got to me, and he was like, "Nope." I was like, "Oh, okay." It was like in that How to Train Your Dragon movie. Like, you just pointed at all of me. But but it was a fun show, though. I really appreciated. He did find some candidates and put on a fun little hypnosis. Oh yeah, Crescent Dawn, I see your hand up on the board too. I'm so glad you raised your hand. Hello.
Hello. I'm gonna take prompt number 3. That sounds like a game of but I enjoy the concept of recycling old information into new packages to carry on with future, endeavors. So coming from my background of, engineering and overall accident investigation and, incident reports, things of that nature, oftentimes you'll see electronic incidents and I think I'm back. There we go. Sorry about that. I'm lagging a little bit.
We're getting a little bit of lag from you, but I doubt it's within your control. So we're hearing you.
My apologies. So kind of going off that, right? Every single incident that anyone witnesses on the field can become incredible very, very quickly. However, when you're on field, none of us have the time to actually handle it at that time, and so we have to internalize it and then take it back with us later on. And at that point, whether the person chooses to vent or what have you, that's lagging. So sorry.
Oh, it's terrible timing. It's reminding me of our alt space days. Whenever somebody would raise their hand, it was like that was the moment that the audio just went south. But I hear you a little bit better now, though.
Oh, okay, perfect. Sorry about that. Yeah, I don't know what's going on with my internet. Oh, there we go. Okay, I should be back, hopefully.
Or mic sensitivity, maybe?
Testing 1, 2, 3, 2. 1, 2, 3.
It could be something worth checking, but I think sensitivity wouldn't have like the skipping. It sounds a little bit like bandwidth to me. So if there's any way to check both. But we also have the keyboard as well, if it feels good to type out some of it, because we could definitely get an image that way too.
Okay, I should be back. Promised. It's definitely a Wi-Fi problem. My apologies for that. I do a fair bit of maintenance today.
No apologies necessary. Yeah, thanks for speaking up.
Yeah, going off of that, right? I often take like a more investigative and engineering approach to like what I would describe as a failure, whether it be something that was fault or just past trauma in my life and the failure to move past it. Taking that investigative approach to why did it happen, what events led up to it, how is it impacting me directly, then that allows someone to be able to classify how significant it would be to tackle the problem, so on and so forth. And then from there you take a very analytical approach to it, and you kind of break it down into tiny steps, right, of past, right? I don't know why it's so laggy. I'm so sorry. Okay. So yeah, kind of going off that, the idea of repackaging traumatic events into a more utilitarian concept for the individual, right? You know, like how do I turn what happened in the past into like not necessarily a tool, but like a stepping stone so I can move forward in the future. That is a very interesting way of tackling, you know, life as a whole. And I know for quite a bit of people that's a very hard thing to do, but it can be very rewarding at the same time. Not that I'd recommend it, you know. It takes a lot of internal self-reflection, of course, but it's a very interesting way of handling traumatic events. And same thing with like EMRD, for example, right? Like unintentionally, that gets kind of used in the field a lot because our eyes are constantly rapidly darting and moving around and constantly analyzing and looking for clues on things that happened, which can kind of help the mind sort of gloss over something that it might have, you know, seen that might be traumatic if you spend any more time or thought onto it, up until the point where, again, it's important to go back and take a step and look at what you just saw and go over it, put it in the clue bin, and so on and so forth. But I think the idea of utilizing that method to kind of assist oneself in just recovery from trauma is very important, in my opinion, at least, and I think it could be very beneficial. And I think it's an interesting prompt to ask.
Oh, wonderful! You know, and now that your audio is kind of clearing to a larger degree too, I heard some aspects of you describing like the analytical side of it, like looking at an engineering or like an incident management kind of report and like sort of officially declaring if it was like a failure or like were there some other aspects that you could share from that too? Because that was like the part where the mic like really cut out.
Yeah, definitely. So, like, going off of like what identifies as an incident in the context of at least the way I would process trauma is the failure is the fact that the trauma is holding me back in some way, whether I'm afraid to ride my motorcycle again because the last time I did it, I fell and, you know, my leg got injured really bad and it was a huge mess, right? So rather than being afraid of riding a motorcycle ever again, I could sort of take that incident that happened, I could almost not entirely disassociate my body, but look at it from a very third-person perspective, analyze what exactly went wrong, and then with the knowledge that I have moving forward, I can confront the scary thing that's in my life, right? That's at least the way I look at it personally.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, that part helped me really kind of connect the dots on it too. So yeah, thanks for expanding upon the thought. Is you know, I'm kind of sensing, if I'm hearing it right, that like the process of looking at it like objectively and analytically like sort of uncovers. I thought you made a really great kind of metaphor of like being afraid to ride the motorcycle, like maybe after you had a spill, and you know, that kind of being like the primary point to bring out and sit with and look at and invite, you know, so that you can get the desensitization like part that we've talked about, the reintegration of that memory. Yeah, so yeah, thanks for sharing that process, and thanks for pulling a prompt off the screen too. Yeah, that's super appreciated. Yeah, and just checking if we had hand raises. I can share kind of a personal anecdote too about motorcycles and trauma, which in this case, it wasn't an accident. I had this motorcycle that I absolutely loved, and it had this known flaw where the frame was a little bit weak near the handlebars, so over time it could develop like a crack, and you had to get it repaired because it was a safety issue if the frame suddenly lost its you know, integrity. Well, the company warranted it, and we found a dealership, and they essentially like had to take the whole bike apart and put it back together again because it's like the frame, like you had to replace the frame,
Oh yeah.
and it never ran right again. And it's like
Oh,
I took it back again and again, and I was like, I don't know what's going on. I have all kinds of motorcycle friends. They said it could be this, could be that, but like nothing we tried like worked. And it robbed me like of the enjoyment of riding because like you would ride and then it would start doing the thing. And even after it got fixed, I finally took it to like a separate mechanic and like paid the extra fees to just have somebody else like do it. They found what was wrong and fixed it lickety split, and it ran like a dream. But when I was riding, I was just no longer enjoying riding anymore because I was
Oh.
just waiting for it to do its thing. And
Yeah.
had I had my brain now, had I understood more about how brains like work, I could have gotten over it. But like my younger self was like stuck in this process. So I wish we had met and you could have walked me through where's the
definitely.
value point, in this process. That's hey, your bike works again. Enjoy it. You fixed it.
Yeah.
re-engage trust.
Right. Yeah, so that was a life lesson. Let's see. I don't see any more hand raises, but yeah, we got a nice intimate group here too. So maybe we pulled out all of the commentary for tonight, and yeah, if that's looking like that, then we'll kind of officially close the event at this point. But we'll be back next week, and at Chapter 16, I didn't look ahead. I don't quite know what it's about, but it's in the healing section. So it's probably going to be like performance based healing or maybe yoga. One of those aspects that Dr. Vanderkolk talked about, like in Chapter 14, where he sort of listed all of these different techniques to help with traumatic healing. So I'm just getting such a kick out of putting the audiobook on and going for a walk and learning all about this. These are aspects of the book I haven't actually gotten into yet. Like I read, I think, the first half of the book like 15 or 20 years ago, and it like really opened up my eyes. But I never finished it. So this whole experience has been like an excuse to really finish the book and to do it together, which is, I mean, this has all turned into kind of like something I would have put on my bucket list had I known how awesome it was going to be. So, thanks for being a part of all that. And yeah, if there's no further hand raises, I'll put the audio back on normal, and we'll plan on next Thursday again for the next chapter. So yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.
Awesome.
Yeah, enjoy. Good night.
Okay.
Good
Take
night.
care.